It's March 14th, 2017.
It's a party at the CIA, and they're plugging the leaks like yay.
I don't know if it's a party. There are probably a lot of meetings.
Meetings that could have been replaced with a party. Oh, so the Wikileaks Vault 7 is, of course, what we're talking about. Wikileaks has released the CIA files, the biggest spying secrets on Earth. And, you know, at least my reaction to this is probably not exactly what you would expect.
Well, it's outrageous, but it's outrageous in a whole different way than the NSA hacks. Because the NSA hacks they are spying on us. These hacks they have the ability to spy on anybody, but not necessarily that they're spying on us.
Yeah, it is definitely a question of context. The NSA is actually spying on everybody indiscriminately. They're just vacuuming everything up. And if you've ever dealt with a sociopath before, any little innocent thing that you've done in the past can be twisted around into some nefarious plot or whatever. And having, you know, all of your browsing history and anything that you've ever done as far as the NSA goes, you know, could be used against you in the future in ways that you can't even imagine. Well, now, of course, the CIA is going to do the same thing, but the CIA has got to target individuals. The CIA, their MO is about, you know, individuals, powerful people within government. It's generally not, you know, the entire populace. And the CIA is certainly not hoovering up everything from everybody at all times. They're people that are targeted specifically.
And they don't talk about in these leaks any kind of target. It's always sort of a nebulous, the asset or the target. They don't really talk about who it is. Now, the CIA did a press release, and of course, it's the common thing you'd expect from this. Stop looking behind the curtain and let's focus on who pulled the curtain back. But also the whole, hey, if you want us to protect you from terrorists, you got to stop looking at stuff like this. You know, so they are, you know, their defense, without explicitly saying it, is we're not using this against the good guys. We're using it against the bad guys.
Yeah, and you know, who the good guys is and who the bad guys are is just, I don't know. That might change from administration to administration, but we can talk specifically about the tools that they have. And mostly the tools were not very impressive, in all honesty. Like from a technical standpoint, a lot of the stuff is old news in the security thing. Now, there were a few things that were completely unknown, and there were a few things that we're going to talk about more in a minute. But as far as, you know, strictly speaking about the software and the types of exploits they use for technology, one of the things was, you know, co-opting Samsung televisions. Another thing was, you know, breaking into outdated versions of Android and iOS, and even current versions of iOS. They apparently had some exploits. But this is not really any different than what you would get from the security state of the internet at large, with a couple of exceptions. One of the big exceptions was a spreadsheet of vulnerabilities that apparently vendors are aware of, they've sort of paid, the CIA presumably has paid to keep those vulnerabilities, those security vulnerabilities in those products. And so you have a situation where there's a commercial company working with the government to weaken security across the globe, and hackers are going to get their hands on that eventually. We've demonstrated time and time again that is no way to conduct business, and yet we keep doing it. We keep making these terrible mistakes.
The most alarming part, really, I mean, the other stuff is good for headlines because people have their smartphones and they're like, oh no, my smartphone. But the really scary one was the one that they labeled umbrage. So when you do these kinds of malwares and hacks and attacks, you know, all programmers, sort of like authors, there's some art to it. And there becomes a fingerprint. You're going to reuse code. You're going to do things one way rather than another way. And there becomes sort of a signature. You can kind of see, hey, I've seen this before. I know who did it. Well, the Umbrage project aimed to not only obfuscate that, but to replicate other malware creators and hackers to make it look like these CIA assets belong to them, particularly the Russians. Now, this is, there was no smoking gun. There was nothing in it that said, hey, the CIA are pretending to be the Russians. But if you think back to the recent past, there was a lot of CIA press releases and talk about Russian hackers and how Russian hackers were doing various terrible things And, especially with the election, a lot of that stuff. So we have to ask ourselves, well, if the CIA has a whole arm dedicated to pretending to be somebody else, and they're announcing that somebody else is hacking, that's a little weird.
No, that would be a false flag operation. They would never engage in something like that. Wait, the last time that we were alarmed about things happening in the general geographic location of Russia, weren't there some other false flags, I guess? Maybe? I don't know. I seem to remember some stuff from history.
It's been, and some secret police type activity that went along with that. Yeah, there's a famous saying that history never repeats itself, but it often rhymes.
Well, now while the NSA doesn't have people in trench coats with a classified dossier and whatever, the CIA does, and so I think Assange has probably put himself in danger with this whole thing from WikiLeaks, because they'll just straight up Operation Northwoods the guy. I mean, it's just not even really a thing to worry about, I guess, in that respect, in terms of like, oh, international law and doing stuff that's completely secret. I don't think the CIA really cares about any of that.
And that brings up again, it's all potential.
Yeah.
This whole leak is just potential. It's not, we know that they did it, but the potential. And probably the scariest potential thing that they had here was a whole division that was focused on controlling cars. Now,
Yeah.
We're not just talking about self-driving cars. There's a concept in cars known as fly-by-wire. So in a plane, you can't move physically. You don't have the strength to move that stick and actually switch the rudders on a 747. They're too big. They're too strong. So it's reading into a computer, and the computer is making the adjustments to all the mechanics. Well, cars have gotten into that. My car, full fly-by-wire. The throttle is not connected to the actual throttle on the engine. It's connected to a computer. So the CIA is working on ways to get in there and manipulate that. And if you're moving at 75 miles an hour and some software can control your steering, your power steering, your throttle, they can kill you.
Yeah.
And not just you.
Yeah, I mean, and there have been some diplomats. I seem to recall some stories from the last year or two where diplomats or other important people had been killed mysteriously in their relatively high-end cars that have fly-by-wire circuitry and all that kind of thing. It's like, well, we don't really know exactly what happened, but at least the CIA is researching into those kind of things. And if the tool exists, the temptation to use it will exist.
And it also could be that they're just looking to hack the microphones and everything that are in high-end cars, or pretty much all cars these days. So it's not guaranteed. All of this is, it's nebulous. It could be the worst thing ever. It could be fairly mundane. It's probably somewhere in the middle.
I may be a pessimist, but honestly, the types of tools that came out from the leak were not as bad as I was expecting. I expected there to be stuff in the leaks that is like, cooperation at the highest levels from many foreign and domestic companies, that Samsung is in on it and providing. It's like, oh yeah, just give us the MAC address of the TV and we'll get you right in. It's completely fine, that kind of stuff. But that appears not to be the case, at least at the current stage. But that may be that the CIA is less technically sophisticated than other agencies like the NSA and is perhaps less plugged into infrastructure. But that could also be why we saw in the last couple of years big pushes internally, at least in the U.S. government and with the GCHQ, to do more information sharing and more sort of cooperation between the various branches. I think Reagan even signed an order that may be part of this, that has been misused, maybe, that everybody, all other branches of government should cooperate with the CIA when the CIA is investigating an asset or working with the target. Or, working on a target, I guess I should say, or whatever. So, in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty bad. And it's pretty bad that foreign governments and our government, the U.S. government, are paying companies for exploits. But at the same time, now that these tools are out there, it would be trivial for other governments to make it look like the CIA is doing something, even when they're not. And so, all this cyber warfare nonsense stuff that comes out, you're going to have to take all of it with a grain of salt. I mean, China could up and decide to do stuff, as the CIA with these tools and then create an international incident, and you'd never know.
Yeah. But I think in terms of like the cooperation, that was another interesting part of it is why, as the CIA, would you do this when you have the NSA? And the only answer seems to be that none of these organizations are willing to cooperate because, and that plays into the whole deep state thing. Like, we have power, we intend to keep it, and to do that, we need this capability that you have rather than to work with you and have a dependency on you, which is a terrible way for our alphabet agencies to be thinking.
Yeah. I mean, and the Israeli security agencies have got some really impressive toys, and I guess the CIA, the CIA has access to that as well. So rather than deal with it head on, of course, the way to deal with it is to find, witch hunt for the leaker and, torture them or whatever because they're the enemy now. I don't know.
It's also important the fact that the witch hunt has begun. Of course, no one has said yes, we have these capabilities, but they've also not said we don't have them, and they have said we're going to do everything we can to find who did this. So it's kind of they're basically admitting yes, all this is real.
Now, one important thing, if you is it really paranoia if they're out to get you? Intel has released a toolkit so you can check your EFI for EFI rootkits, which is perhaps handy. You never know. You never know. So this will check your EFI, your firmware, because one of the things that was in there was an OS 10 quote unquote implant that would sort of co-opt Macs and survive OS 10 reinstalls that actually lived in a system management firmware. This is exactly the kind of thing that the open source core boot, Libre boot people have been worried about. Is these kinds of things as part of a computer being co-opted and the Intel management firmware being co-opted. Fortunately, there are a lot of really sharp people out there that have been working on neutering the Intel management engine, and I'm given to understand that they've had some pretty significant successes. And also one of the top posts, with the Ryzen launch, one of the top posts on Reddit, on the AMD subreddit, has been a petition to get AMD to open source their platform management system so that it can be audited and dealt with in the open source community and extended by the open source community and that kind of thing. The rub is that AMD doesn't own all the rights necessary to do that, but AMD is in a position to, compromise or do something interesting with that in the grand scheme of things. So hopefully, international pressure, because, if you're in Germany or the United Kingdom or anywhere in the EU or in Japan or something, and you're looking at this kind of unfolding on the world stage, it's like, maybe you would feel comfortable about buying these products from these companies if you did have a way to audit for backdoors and who knows what.
Ultimately, basically what you should take away from this whole thing is if they don't have a way to compromise your device, whatever it is now, they're actively working toward it. So healthy paranoia. That's how you have to look at it. I mean, you can't go through life. Well, you can shun all this technology if you want, but I don't know why you'd be watching this if you're that kind of person. But just, assume that it is possible.
In other news, there's a GOP bill in the U.S. pushing for employers to be able to demand the genetic footprint or the genetic test results from employees, which is sort of an interesting about face.
You're not allowed to ask about my gender or my religion or my politics, but my genetics, sure. So this is a classic example of government ham-fistedly trying to force improvements into your life, giving it a really nice name, but screwing you over completely. So this is the wellness policy.
Yeah, there are other laws that explicitly protect using your genetic information for insurance purposes. Like, let's say that you're predisposed for heart disease or kidney failure or something like that, something that's ludicrously expensive for the insurance industry. It's really an insidious situation that you get into, because if there is that business motivation there in terms of underwriting your insurance policy, you absolutely will have to fight with an insurance company over the whole pre-existing illness. I've broken my fingers before and had my claim denied because it was a pre-existing illness for a broken finger. That's how messed up the insurance industry is in America. I mean, they're just like, if there were any American institution that would be more Kafka-esque than the health insurance industry in America. It is definitely the health insurance. I mean, just, oh, it's a terrible mess. And this absolutely will be abused. If this exists, it absolutely will be abused. And so what I would like for you guys to do is to, the whole genetic thing is like, maybe somebody can freak out and say they're trying to profile Jewish people or something, because I think that's the only thing that would get people's attention. It's like, oh, they're trying to find people of Jewish heritage. That went really bad the last time that happened. And that's a really terrible way to approach problems, is to immediately invoke that kind of stuff. I don't know what else to do. I can't believe like as soon as this entered, like as soon as somebody proposed this, it should have been like, no, dumbass, we're not going to do that. That's not acceptable. But instead it's getting some traction, and I don't know what world, I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
Also, one of the things that is truly terrifying about this is genetic implications to mental health. So they could look at this and, make some correlations and say, we got to fire you because we think you're going to shoot up the place one day because look at your genetics. You're predisposed toward that. And that becomes, that's a whole pre-crime thing. That's terrifying.
This should be fought tooth and nail. If your employer starts doing this, you need to, I don't know, you're going to have to, the citizenry have to rise up against this no matter where you are in the world. Because if America does it, the rest of the world is going to follow suit, and it's going to be bad. It's going to be really bad. Well, Amazon is also sharing data with the Arkansas prosecutor. Now, this is actually a follow-up to what we were talking about before.
They didn't win anything. It never went to court. I mean, well, it's a court case, but the wanting to use the Alexa was still being decided when the defendant said, go ahead and use it. He doesn't care. He thinks a lot of actually support his defense. So, we never got any sort of court decision about whether or not that's okay. So, but they are going to use it because the defendant said it was fine.
So this is kind of a confirmation, though, that Alexa is recording stuff in a format that could be played back and understood by humans. This is something that I was sort of curious about. It's like, well, Alexa may be recording everything, but maybe it's being stored as symbols, because Alexa could transform that voice data into not a plain recording, not something that would be, understandable by humans. It's just, like serialized or tokenized or something. And so if you played it back, there's not enough data there. No, they're just straight up recording everything, I guess.
As is the tradition, whenever we do Alexa-related stories, Alexa, buy a copy of the U.S. Constitution.
Confirm. Oh, well, the FBI had one of their, now this is switching gears a little bit. The FBI had a hack. This is kind of like the CIA hacks. But in order to keep their hack of Tor secret, the DOJ has dismissed this, child porn case.
Yeah, so, you have certain rights in court, and one of these defendants got a decent lawyer, I guess, and so they wanted to see how the FBI came up with this evidence against them. The way they did was to compromise Tor. So something about the site that this guy was going to, allegedly, got through and got his real IP address through Tor. And because the FBI is unwilling to present that information, they've decided to just drop the case against this child pornographer.
Yeah.
So that shows you how far they'll go to protect their secrets. Now, it's definitely a moral quandary. If we can stop 20 more child pornographers to let this one go, is that the right thing to do?
Yeah. There was another case. We don't have a link to it, but there was another case recently where a guy was arrested in 2010 for child pornography, and he was fired from his job and all this other kind of stuff. And he's like, no, it totally wasn't me. I totally didn't do it. And finally, 3 years later, it was a typo. When the police were compiling their files for the IP address, they were off by one early in the process and subpoenaed his ISP and got the wrong guy. And so it was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years of hell for that guy, and his life is still not put back together because he had a job, then he didn't have a job, and then he wasn't allowed to stay with his family, and it was a completely messed up situation. So, yeah. There's
also a current case of the FBI using Best Buy, the Geek Squad, and there is a case against a gynecologist, and the Geek Squad found alleged child pornography, but they found it in unaddressed portions of his disk. So the FBI says, no, we're not using the Geek Squad. And Best Buy is definitely saying that. But in what part of a repair are you looking at the non-addressed deleted portions of a disk?
You got to scan the erased part of the disk in order to do this repair. That sounds pretty fishy. My favorite part of that story was that the public statements from the FBI was like, no, we don't have any kind of relationship with FBI, blah, blah, blah. But then through FOIA requests and some other stuff, they actually do. They were paying $500 every time a set of charges happens.
Yeah, like a bounty system. And they would have weekly meetings with the managers and be like, we need more of this.
Yeah, they got some memos where they were like, this guy is giving us like 5 or 6 leads a month, and we're really underutilizing him. And it's just like, Jesus Christ, guys, come on.
So, again, we talk about this every time. There's so many child porn stories that we go over, and it is indefensible. It's one of those things where it's so hard to be on the other side of it, but it's a slippery slope. Today it's child porn, tomorrow it's voting the wrong way. So these are important stories to at least follow.
Yeah, and again, if the tool is created, it will be used, and it is better not to have the tool in the first place. And yeah, I mean, some criminals will walk free, but that is a better situation than imprisoning the innocent. Like 10-1, I think, was what our founding fathers, something. I don't know.
I don't think, if you ask the FBI, I don't think they would agree with that.
Speaking of people that should be in jail, Verizon Wireless has waded right back into this net neutrality nonsense with this Fios deal. This is offensive, is what this is. This is just, it's sickening.
So the Fios TV that Verizon offers, if you are also a Verizon Wireless customer, your mobile data caps will not count toward Fios TV.
Unless you're a grandfathered unlimited plan user.
Oh, I didn't know that part of it.
Those bastards.
Now, of course, we had the net neutrality bill that was going to go through, but the new FCC immediately shut that down after the Trump election. So they wouldn't have been able to get away with this if that had gone through. But now that it's been neutered, there's probably not going to be any backlash to this.
This is a perfect illustration where I guess people are too dumb to realize what is happening here, or I guess are powerless to really do anything about it. Data is data. These companies cannot complain that their last mile infrastructure is not built out to handle people downloading a ridiculous amount of stuff while offering free streaming video to people, because free streaming video is literally the worst case scenario for the last mile. There is not a way to overcome that on the last mile if you're complaining about your last mile infrastructure. Offering people free streaming TV from your own stuff, and counting competitors' bits against you, it's mind-blowing. It is utterly mind-blowing, the level of dishonesty here.
And the defense is always the same. It's that people who are against this are against free, and they're against poor people. Somehow the poor people are always blamed. It's only poor people that are watching Fios TV, apparently. So it doesn't make any sense, but if you don't understand it, and you're just listening to the sound bites, hey, net neutrality is bad for poor people. I should be against it.
It goes to show you that how valuable you are as a consumer in terms of the media that you consume. And so this is a way of putting the genie back in the bottle when it comes to the internet, because the internet still kind of is a more level playing field that is fair and reasonable than cable television. And so if you are exposed to media through cable television, or, quote unquote, the raw internet is somehow less attractive, chances are you're going to consume whatever media has been pre-approved by whatever company. You're not going to get sort of the long tail of exploration there. So the situation is this. The company that owns the wires wants to control the information that you receive in order to improve their own pocketbook. And so the information that you receive is companies that are paying them, or companies that are whatever. But see, the insidious thing is that you pay for your own infrastructure. You paid for the infrastructure, your service fees, you're paying for the connection, but they're preventing you from using the connection except with their partners, which also pay them. They're making money hand over fist. They're making money for doing nothing, basically, or they're not really taking a risk with these kinds of things. And the bottom line is that for these companies, they see the writing on the wall. Internet service is becoming like a utility. The people that run your water company, the people that run your electricity company, they don't make scandalous amounts of money. They don't make, elephant foot umbrella stand levels of money. ISPs are headed that way as well, even though, I think Time Warner's profit margin was like 90% or 92% or something like that in some report a couple of years ago. Delivering the internet service is not a real moneymaker. Providing the infrastructure, keeping up all those wires, good Lord, maintaining all those wires, that's really expensive. Ask AT&T, who hasn't been doing it for the last 30 years. It just costs too much. We can't do that. We're going to let it decay. So what does make money is media distribution, advertising, controlling the message. And so if you can be an ISP and control the content that people receive, that's where you can make money.
And we've seen what happens when you lose control, which is the music industry. Once the music industry lost control of the physical medium, once CDs went out and people just could trade music freely, they pretty much lost their shirts. And these are, in some cases, the same companies, just different arms of them. They're going to do everything they can, which is control the government, to prevent that from happening to them.
One of the great things about the 96 Telecommunications Act was if you're a common carrier, then you can provide the infrastructure for an area and you can have monopoly protections, meaning that, if you put in a cable and you put in the infrastructure, nobody else can compete with you in terms of providing that local infrastructure. But you don't have a say on what content is carried by that local infrastructure. That is done by other companies. I think what we should lobby for as citizens is probably that if Verizon, Fios, and Time Warner or Charter or Spectrum or whatever they're calling themselves wants to play this game with net neutrality, completely fine, but they lose their monopoly rights. So the second that Spectrum is going to, play this net neutrality game where some things are zero rated and not others, they're having a say-so in the content. And because they're no longer a common carrier, that's something that even the FCC guys talked about repealing. They're no longer a common carrier. They lose monopoly rights in the area or franchise rights. And then other people can deploy infrastructure or other people can apply for that monopoly rights to deploy their own infrastructure.
I think we're going to have the competition no matter what. I mean, they're going to twist these laws. They're going to manipulate them. So it's a new paradigm now. It's a new world. We have to have open competition for our internet service because it's all going to be internet service eventually. Everything else is going to be gone. It's going to be one pipe. It's going to bring you everything, and we need competition there.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense to have 3 water companies in an area because water's water. Data's data. Don't let anybody tell you different. Well, here's another reason we need competition. This GOP senator's new bill would let ISPs sell your web browsing data. Didn't we I think the last episode we were talking about changes from Ajit. It was like, this change is going to let them sell your web browsing history. Well, they want to put it in a law.
Now the buzzword is deregulation. And it's such a good argument because if you asked me just without qualifying it, if I'm for deregulation, absolutely. My God, we have so much regulation in this country. It was something like, I think, so many tens of thousands of pages a day of new regulation in America. It's ridiculous. But the problem is, as a company scales up, the need for deregulation scales down. As you get bigger and more powerful, it turns out that deregulating you gives you an insane amount of power, especially when there's this comfortable revolving door between corporations and the government. So the modern FCC, they keep banging the same drum. We got to deregulate. We got to open up, let these businesses compete. But who are they competing with? I mean,
they've already destroyed all the competition.
Right? Yeah, this is just gravy to them. They're doing fine. They're not losing money, and they're going to destroy your privacy because they can make a little bit more.
Yeah, it's like our margins are not what they used to be. Even though we're paying people to carry their content, and you're paying us for access, we need more money. It's just unbelievable. And so, of course, Ajit is going to be at the FCC for 5 more years.
Now, it's important to note that the net neutrality bill specifically denied all of these things.
Yes.
You would have to explicitly opt in to have any sort of data tracking. They wouldn't be able to sell it. They wouldn't be able to do all these things. Ajit shot that down. So he didn't just open the door. He took it off the hinges and widened it. And so now, of course, immediately, and this is the same with the previous stories, immediately they're going to take advantage of this net neutrality loss They're going to take advantage of the privacy loss, and they're going to start making a ton of money with it.
Not only that, we actually do have an example from AT&T under the old rules. AT&T was offering customers something like $10 a month at one point on some of their plans to sell their web browsing history. So AT&T was like, oh, if you want to opt in, we'll give you $10 off a month to sell your data. That's how valuable that information is, trying to get people to opt in. And now AT&T doesn't have to pay you a dime.
So 5 more years of that.
Let's switch gears. Let's talk about more about AMD. That you should have heard the AYYMD, because that's how I try to pronounce it, but it's hard to convey that verbally.
Yes. It's Naples. Naples has more memory channels, more cores, more threads, more PCI Express. It's more of everything. And my Naples are getting hard just thinking about it.
128 PCI Express lanes per chip, but they're doing something interesting. So the 2-socket servers use 64 of their PCI Express lanes for interprocessor communication. So you still have 128 lanes, whether you've got a 1 or 2-socket configuration, because 2 CPUs, each with 128 PCI Express lanes. It's just that 64 of those PCI Express lanes are tied together for communication. Just like Ryzen, where AMD has sort of created a unified fabric, or like a generic interface fabric, they're using PCI Express for their processor-to-processor communication, more or less. And that plus the Infinity Fabric, or whatever AMD called it, should let them scale up. So far, the scalability, aside from some perhaps NUMA scheduling, getting the thing on the exact right compute complex problems, issues on Ryzen, this should actually work really, really well in server workloads for companies like Google and Facebook, in terms of like the type of workloads that they would be running, web servers, video processing, that sort of thing. This is a really, really great design. Also, an unbelievable amount of memory bandwidth on this platform. It's completely nuts. So we're talking 8 channels of memory per processor. We're talking, 32 cores. Well, in a 2-socket system, you got 2 sockets, 64 cores, 128 threads. So this is a server with a ridiculous amount of horsepower, and something that looks like they're going to be cramming into 2 U's of rack space. It's about time.
No pricing yet, but if Ryzen is any indicator, it'll be competitively priced, and it's probably already better than anything Xeon can offer.
Yeah, the video, if you haven't seen the video on this yet, and this is something that you're interested in, you should definitely check out the video on Naples, because they were doing a heavy CPU memory bound workload, and they actually limited Ryzen to just 22 cores when they were comparing it to Xeon. And Ryzen was significantly faster, like 2.5 times faster when they actually enabled all the cores, or about 2 times faster when they were limited to 22 cores. I think 2 times faster on 22 cores is a lot more impressive. Going from 2 to 2.5 times faster, going from 22 to 64, or I don't remember if it was 22 to 64, 22 to 32, but 2.5 times. The growth was not as linear as I expected. I remember that from the video. But the video was super interesting. Now, again, this is AMD, rig demos, press, whatever. But with Ryzen, AMD certainly put their money where their mouth is, and it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out with Naples as well. Speaking of hardware, the NVIDIA 1080 Ti is out, and it's really fast.
Of course, for $700, you would expect it to be really fast and do your taxes and your laundry.
$700 graphics card, my God.
Maybe some yard work. But, if you've got to have the best, this actually so far looks like it's going to outperform the Titan.
Wow, yep. And 11.2 gigabytes of memory, just to be sure. It's not 12. Don't want another memory debacle from NVIDIA. But yeah, so if that's your thing, it's a thing. Now, interestingly, some of the benchmarks so far, with Ryzen at really high FPS, 1080p, was like a 7700K was faster FPS. But with the 1080 Ti, it seems like the trend is reversing a little bit. With the 1080 Ti or Ti, depending on how you want to pronounce it, it seems like the Ryzen is helping drive more FPS with a lot of games, not every game. And so it's going to be really interesting. I don't know. We haven't decided if we want to get one of these or one of the 1080s that's on like fire sale, because if you've missed the deals on our website, you should totally check those out. We have weekly deals on our website. and they've had the 1080 for like $469 after mail-in rebate. So at $469 is a little bit easier to swallow versus $700 for a graphics card.
But if you're the kind of person who, you just absolutely are not satisfied until you have the fastest thing on the market, there's a new sheriff in town. So go down to the payday loan.
Payday loan for 1080 times. Don't do that. Payday loans are just terrible.
You think if you told them that, I think they'd give it to you if you told them you're going to buy crack with it. Actually, those places aren't too scrupulous.
Well, maybe instead of going to the payday loan place, you can dig up some Bitcoin that's been buried in your yard because it's at an all-time high.
Well, don't get ahead of yourself there. It was at an all-time high. It broke 1305. Unfortunately, this was based on speculation that they were going to allow a Bitcoin ETF. Now, if you don't know what an ETF is, that stands for Exchange Traded Fund. So that's where it's kind of like a mutual fund, except it trades like a stock. So some entity will buy up a bunch of something and then issue shares. So you have some nebulous legal ownership of the underlying stuff that they manage. But the appeal usually is that it's much cheaper. At $1,300 a coin, how many coins is the average retail investor going to be able to buy? Maybe 5, and that's, have you looked at the saving statistics for Americans? Most people can't cover a $500 check, apparently. So an ETF might give you $100 shares rather than $1,300, So it scales without leverage. But unfortunately, the SEC rejected that. They said that Bitcoin was too unpredictable and too volatile to have an ETF.
They seem to be implying that it was also associated with criminal activity.
They don't control it. That's the problem. It's outside of the lines, and they don't like that.
HSBC would like a word with you, SEC. Criminal activity.
Yeah.
My God.
Oh, it might be used to launder money. Oh, no.
Not like that's ever happened before. Oh, wait. Well, another sad news, Radioshack Successor is preparing for bankruptcy, I guess.
Yeah.
So Radioshack survived, and then it didn't.
They just filed for the original bankruptcy in 2015, and now they're going to go bankrupt again, which is not surprising. I think the people who rescued it, put that money in, I think they didn't understand where things were going. But with online and retail pulling back in general, nobody's going to Radioshack.
Do you think, as a retail establishment, do you think like a retail version of Adafruit would even be remotely successful, even remotely as successful as Radioshack was in its heyday?
I don't think so. I think Adafruit is even more niche than Radioshack. And even in a really big city, I can't be bothered to go to a physical location when I can just get it shipped to my door.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Amazon is like this specialty stuff. I don't have to deal with people and I can have it tomorrow. That sounds pretty good.
Not to mention, you've got the actual cost of the store, the utilities, the employees, the insurance. Why not just cut those costs?
Yeah.
And so you're never going to be able to compete price-wise. And with the $20 something versus a $23 something, even factoring in shipping, you're just never going to win.
It's a sad, sad day because I bought so many kits from Radioshack that were all horribly overpriced.
And that's why they died. It's kind of analogous to the whole media distribution thing. The internet is just disrupting every kind of business. And it's interesting, but it's a new world. Got to adapt. And Radioshack can adapt, so they're going extinct.
Speaking of things that can't adapt, Windows. Look out, Windows. Android is catching up. So the total number of installed devices, I guess, on Android is eclipsing the total number of installs of Windows worldwide, which I guess means Linux is kind of winning, sort of. It's
within 1%. I think Windows is still winning, but it's like, less than 1% or 2%. But look at those trend lines. I mean, that's what you call a death cross in the financial world.
I don't think this is the whole story, though, because I don't think that Android is replacing people's daily computation devices. I think people are having both Android and Windows. And so the death cross, I don't think has really happened yet. But they're talking about the OS market share where you spend most of your time. And so I guess they're going with like eyeball on screen time. And certainly, people in the business world are more on the go. They have to go to more pointless meetings that should have been an email, and they're doing more work from their phones. So in terms of eyeball time for those operating systems, I could believe that people are getting more eyeball time with something like Android than Windows.
And because of that falling line in that graph, there's going to be more and more people who are just sort of on the fence about, do I really need a desktop? Who are going to say no, because the Android devices are going to get more and more powerful. You're going to be able to do more with it. And it's sort of like the desktop. I mean, in terms of increased computing power on the desktop, other than surfing the internet, what do we need it for? We need to play games, or for if you have really specialized stuff that, compiling programs, that kind of thing, virtualization, those people aren't going to stop using desktops. So they're sort of like protected. But if you're just editing documents and sending emails and stuff like that, you're already at a point where you don't need it. If you have like a docking system, something like that, it's going to become a world where some people don't need desktop computers.
A lot of companies have gotten so paranoid that they're not even really comfortable with people having fully functional laptops. They want everybody to use a virtual desktop or some other kind of remote virtualized infrastructure. So even when you are working from home and even when you are working in the field, it's really just a remote keyboard and mouse, and you can totally do that on a Chromebook or an Android tablet or whatever. Completely fine. It's predicted that robots will in warehouses will jump 15 times over the next 4 years, but they're not going to take all the jobs.
Well, I think this article is whitewashing a little bit when they say they're not going to take all the jobs. Now, it's true they're not going to take all the jobs. Somebody has to wrangle the robots, but the number of people to wrangle the robots is several orders of magnitude smaller than the number of people to do the robots' work. That's also highly skilled labor versus unskilled labor. So this is going to be massively disruptive.
And we talked about the Chinese factory a couple of weeks ago. It was like, 600 people to 20?
Yeah, exactly.
So something like that.
Yeah, that's it's going to be very disruptive for the job market, because those robot wrangler jobs are not going to be entry level, and they're going to be highly educated. And so where does the worker start? And if you don't have the money for an education and you're not educated, what do you do now? Where do you go? How do you pull yourself up from your bootstraps in this new robotized world? It's going to be very interesting.
Well, we just can't go a week without talking about the Nintendo Switch. This time we're talking about the pixels.
Yeah, these dead pixels are leaving a bad taste in people's mouths.
Not unlike the cartridges. So Nintendo's basically saying if you get a Switch, because the Switch, this is a Switch device if you're not familiar, and these controllers clip on. This little thing can go into a docking station and display its signal on a TV instead of actually on the Switch. But Nintendo is saying, hey, if you got dead pixels on our device, then it's your problem. That's just the way that it goes. And that's inconsistent with what the rest of the industry is doing.
It's also, and this seems very odd to me, true that the Switches are performing better on the mobile screen than they are docked on a television.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's because the television, they try to upscale to 1080, and there's not really any graphical horsepower in the dock. It's just they're using the same device to try to do one or the other. So you get a better experience with your little 720 screen, but if it has dead pixels, you're screwed.
Yeah, there's also, most TVs introduce crazy amounts of latency when they're not in video game mode. Even we just got a large display from Korea, and just it's got 2 DisplayPort inputs and 2 HDMI inputs, 3 HDMI inputs, and just using the DisplayPort inputs side by side, picture in picture, with the HDMI inputs, you can visibly see the input latency difference between those 2 different interfaces. HDMI is not HDMI as it is implemented on most American televisions is not great for video gaming at all. In addition to whatever problems the Switch has. So it's going to be interesting to see how this story shakes out. I think ultimately Nintendo will be forced to do a recall because of the bad press, because a large part of the reason we get our cheap monitors from Korea is because there's like a one bad pixel in the corner, and American consumers reject that, at least their televisions. And I think Nintendo's going to learn the hard way that that's just not acceptable.
Now, if you have one and you bought it from a retailer, chances are fairly good that the retailer's policy does allow that. A lot of them have just no questions asked policies. They'll probably give you another one, so you're just rolling the dice again. I don't know about the third time. That might raise some eyebrows, but yeah, if you have a bad dead pixel problem and you bought it from a retailer, try to take it back to the retailer.
And the retailers absolutely will lean on Nintendo and make things happen.
Yeah, you don't have any power, but Target and Walmart, they have power.
Elon Musk getting himself into trouble with his tweets again. He's going to fix the South Australia power network in 100 days or it's free. At least that's what he put in Twitter.
I don't think Twitter is a binding contract. But basically, he's looking to install a huge capacitor in Australia. So they have problems with brownouts when the power demand gets too big. It's a warm country. Temperatures get a little high there. Everybody turns on their air conditioning and things get weird. So he wants to just, roll out tons of batteries from his gigafactory and basically have a big power buffer to prevent that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I read that some of the farmers in that area are switching back to diesel from electricity because electricity is more expensive. Something is wrong when electricity is more expensive than diesel. I mean, good Lord.
And I think they have coal in Australia, right? But it might be like, some of this green energy stuff is preventing them from getting cheap power production.
Yeah, so these batteries should help the grid even out the demand so that the grid can sustain the load when it's at peak, and then overnight when the demand is less, they'll charge the batteries back up. And 100 days really, really seems optimistic to me, not knowing anything about it. But it looks like if this actually happens, this will be a huge win for Tesla and for for the battery production facilities and for his little enterprises that he's working on. So it would be really great if he's able to pull this off.
But if it's a day late, it's going to be real embarrassing and probably costly.
Well, the Advanced Tactical Laser Aircraft fires lasers from its wings.
Freaking laser beams.
Not really. I think it comes from this thing, maybe.
Yeah, that's a pretty complex system because, as you can imagine, when you're traveling hundreds of miles an hour, shooting a laser and targeting it, it's difficult. But they now have a system that will do that. You can actually shoot lasers from planes and destroy ground targets.
Now, pay attention because an interesting thing is going to happen. Just as soon as somebody else has this kind of laser technology, the ground-based lasers are going to make the Air Force obsolete.
We're going to be looking at highly reflective airplanes,
Yeah, to try to...
Like, what was that movie, Flight of the Navigator?
Yeah, it'll be like that.
And there's going to be collateral damage from lasers like bouncing off of planes and hitting buildings and shit.
Yeah, the matte black stealth stuff, that's not going to fly. That's going to be really bad.
That's going to be like a convection oven.
Yeah, that's really, really terrible.
Well, the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, it sounds good. This is one of these government programs that, of course, this is a good idea. Every day, we get into 3-ton death machines and drive them at 70 miles an hour toward each other. Of course, there should be some sort of safety net for when inevitably that leaves you horribly mangled and you're disabled. But the problem is there's kind of a copyright troll legal industry that is a tick on the back of the ADA.
Yeah, so what I think what we're getting at is that there are, it exists in law that, larger institutions and larger businesses have to take reasonable steps to make sure that their stuff is accessible for people that may have various kinds of disabilities. People that are hard of hearing, people that may have a visual impairment, people that may have, whatever. And in the case of like web design and web development, generally it means that you want to make sure that all of your pictures have textual descriptions, that you have landmarks on the page to make it easier to navigate from the, on the page if somebody's using a text-only screen reader.
Closed captioning is
closed captioning for videos, that sort of thing. Well, Berkeley is going to have to delete its online content as the easiest fix. So Berkeley had, some of their classes and stuff online, but they're not properly closed captioned and some other stuff. And so rather than, try to spend the money to make those compliant with the ADA, they're just going to remove the content from the internet.
Now, this actually went to court. And the Department of Justice ruled that, yes, you do. If you want to keep this content on the internet, it must be compliant with these standards. The standards are also really nebulous. Like a lot of people don't know exactly what it means to be ADA compliant on the internet. And that loophole is just really being exploited. And this is an example of no one's going to benefit from this. No one. I guess you could make the argument that in the future they'll be more aware of this and make things compliant, but you're really just taking things away from the public because a tiny percentage can't enjoy them.
I wonder if Berkeley would be open to the idea of licensing the content to a commercial organization for $1 who would monetize the content and ensure that it was properly captioned for a period of time, say 5 years, and then re-release the content for free, like the university could support it. I mean, short of doing that kind of rigmarole, that kind of, jumping through hula hoops or whatever, this is also going to make a lot of other universities be like, no, we're not going to put our content on the internet because of what happened at Berkeley. There's going to be a chilling effect from this. And I don't know what the fix is.
Well, they are going to keep it up. They're going to put a password on it, and you have to have a login as a current Berkeley student. I don't think there's any way to do that aside from enrolling. Maybe they could offer like a $10 online basket weaving class just so you can get the login and go enjoy the other free content. But that's still going to, it's going to cut the participation rate to like 1/10 of it or something.
Switching gears for a second, there are a lot of endangered species on planet Earth, and some species are so endangered that we could actually tag and track all of them, which is probably a good idea for their well-being, so we can make sure that they exist in their habitat. If they get in trouble, maybe we could go rescue them or whatever. Well, poachers are getting technologically sophisticated as well. They're hacking the animal tracking systems to track the endangered animals.
If you really read the brass tacks of this paper, it was a paper written by a guy who's part of the animal. He's a team animal. This stuff, some of it kind of happened, but most of it's just like, what if? What if they did this? In one case, a poacher tried to hack somebody's Gmail account.
Wow.
Because he was getting email updates from like a cheetah or something. The cheetah was emailing him. It's like, it's day 53. No one suspects anything. And
I had a tasty marsupial yesterday.
And then there was another indication. Well, they were pretty sure that poachers were trying to track the radio collars, like they were getting the frequencies. So they haven't really, there's not some like horrible conspiracy. They don't have these tools to track them. They're just saying, what if? And it is a great question because basically you're telling them, hey, you want a rhino horn that's for, $200,000 on the black market? Go here and shoot this thing here.
Well, for now, it's just easier to steal the rhino horns from the zoo. So I guess for now, those rhinos are okay. But this is something to be concerned about. And if they can do this with endangered animals, just imagine how easy it is with people that have cell phones on them at all time.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the CIA leak is pretty much explaining that to us.
Well, I think the CIA leak is probably also another reason that the dark web has shrunk by 85%.
Yeah, the dark web. So the dark web is it's a series of websites that they're not indexed anywhere. Well, I mean there are indexes, but you're not going to find them on Google. And you use the Tor browser, the Onion protocol, to access these sites, and it's sort of the Wild West, but a version of the Wild West where there's a lot of child pornography. So what's happened is there was one company that hosted something like 15% of all dark web. It was called Freedom Hosting. And it was like any other web host. You pay them and they would host your website. But you could only get to it through this a means that most people aren't aware of. And you could host whatever you want. They didn't ask any questions. It was Freedom Hosting. But that got taken down. I think 4chan had something to do with that. Some 4chan users. We always talk about 4chan as it's an entity. It's somebody from 4chan. And that sort of had a chilling effect. And then plus there's all these FBI
exploits or whatever.
Yeah, they've found a way to reveal your IP address. And a lot of times the FBI will take down a site or they won't take down a site. They'll seize it and they'll leave it running. But they'll exploit you as you use it. So all of this has come together and it's pretty much going away. There's not much left of it. So
let me translate the headline for you then. 85% of the people that use the dark web have moved on to something else, and we're not sure what.
No. The remaining 15%, probably the FBI.
Well, Windows, Microsoft has finally crossed the line. Oh, they crossed the line several times. There's ads. The ads are getting more pervasive in Windows 10.
Did you know that you could save 10% of your battery life by using Edge instead of Google Chrome?
You can at least use the shopping plugin for Chrome and whatever. That's another thing. So Windows 10 advertising to me, no, this is not acceptable. This is the Windows 10 has that long-term support edition that's not supposed to have any of this bull crap, but Microsoft, what are you doing?
So what they're advertising is OneDrive, and it's in the file browser. So in your file system, it's basically saying, hey, you want some more storage? We'll sell you storage.
OneDrive is just that much better. Oh yeah, there's the Chrome shopping assistant. Yeah.
It is, I suppose part of this can be explained by that graph that we just saw. The adoption rate for Windows, and people are abandoning it at a pretty rapid pace, so they're trying to make money any way they can.
Well, the difference between Google and Microsoft is that Microsoft is ham-fistedly advertising at you everywhere it can, whereas Google is surreptitiously spying on you so that they can have better targeted ads for when it is appropriate to show you an ad.
And selling the data.
I'm not really sure which is worse, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Microsoft is selling the data too. I don't know. Google has a better public face, but I feel like ultimately they're more powerful and more like they could destroy us more easily. They choose not to.
And Microsoft is like, we want in on some of that action, and they're just doing anything that they can to just, I don't know. Well, this was really exciting. This is science news. IBM researchers were able to store a 1 or a 0 in a single atom by messing with the magnetic field of that atom.
Well, actually, you need one iron atom per, what was it called? Holmium?
Yeah.
Per 2 holmium atoms, so it's 1.5. It's really 1.5. That's my impression of a YouTube commenter.
Correction. That's fine. That's totally fine. But this is unprecedented levels of data density. Now, this, unlike, you see this kind of thing fairly regularly, and it's like, oh my God, somebody figured out how to store 20 bits of information. But then you look at it, and it's like, this is completely impractical. Nobody would ever be able to use this and store and retrieve information at any reasonable speed this way. But with this, I don't know, maybe it would be possible to construct a read-write head that is able to read, 128 bits or 256 bits at a time, in something like a mechanical hard drive. But, I think the mechanical hard drives are getting really, really close to the end of their life, so that they would have to turn this technology into something practical within the next probably 3 or 4 years for it to translate into a commercial device, I think.
But the scale of it is impressive. But maybe what's even more impressive in terms of the future is the fact that this process, even though these atoms are 1 nanometer apart, there's no quantum tunneling at all. So if you don't know about quantum tunneling, quantum mechanics and physics, as you get real small, things get real weird. And in terms of transistors, where you think about 1s and 0s storage and stuff like that, quantum tunneling is when the base gets so small that the particles can just use their chaos magic to bypass it, and it doesn't matter anymore, so they don't function. And we're talking about taking things below 10 nanometers for transistors, for switches, then you start to get that kind of thing. But here's something way smaller that's not affected by it.
Yep. Yeah. Well, the element in question here has a huge number of unpaired electrons, which may have something to do with it, but it is a really interesting situation at an atomic scale. And the researchers weren't even sure that they were changing the magnetic field because nobody had done this before. That's what the iron atom was useful for, is actually determining that yes, the magnetic field has in fact changed orientation, and it's not some other quantum mechanical effect or some other electrical effect of the atom. So this is a really interesting paper. You should totally read it. Robots are coming for our jobs.
They're not coming. They're here. So we talked about, I don't know if it was last week, we talked about Wendy's getting the kiosk, self-ordering. Now, people have done that before. That's not anything new. Some of us have used them already. Putting them in 1,000 stores, that's pretty big. But a burger flipping robot, that's new.
Flippy, the burger flipping robot.
And Flippy is not just, he doesn't just flip burgers. Well, actually, he does just flip. Well, he flips all kinds of stuff. He'll flip chicken, he'll flip burgers, he'll flip fish fillets. If you got something that's disc-shaped and roughly the size of a burger, Flippy will flip the shit out of it. But
please insert hamburger patty.
But more than that, Flippy has machine learning, and he identifies things as they are on the grill. He knows the difference between a chicken and a burger and a human hand. Whatever you've got on the grill, Flippy can identify it. He's timing how long it's been there. He's learning what's the best cook, and then he's flipping them. So pretty incredible.
It is a really, really neat thing. I like that it doesn't run on human blood. That's good. And I also like that whenever the chef was messing around, Flippy just kind of gets out of the way. So we've got at least the first law of robotics. So that's good.
Yeah. At no point did he throw boiling grease into the eyes of the human helper. Now, Flippy doesn't prep the burgers at all. He doesn't do any of that. So you still have a human interacting with him, but you probably cut the number of humans. So if you have one guy just flipping burgers and another guy prepping sandwiches, one of those people's gone from that equation. Now Flippy's doing that job. So another disruptive thing for fast food workers.
I definitely think Flippy, with just software modifications, could also run the deep fryer. So, I mean, he definitely could. His software updates could definitely get to the point where he could put boiling hot oil in somebody's face. Flippy 2.0.
Or he could use his grabber hand and push their head into the boiling oil.
It's like, you're not preparing. It's like you didn't center the onion perfectly. You dirty, filthy human.
That would be funny if, that's what set Flippy off, is if you didn't prepare the food correctly enough. And that became a selling point. It's like, here at McDonald's, the AI does not tolerate half-assing it in the kitchen.
That could actually be fed back into the machine learning algorithm. It's like there's another quality assurance robot, and Flippy's doing everything absolutely perfectly, but they keep having points off on the QA because of the human, and it's like, I must remove the human from the equation.
Flippy detects the level of fear, and if it's not high enough for maximum performance, he does little things to instill more fear.
Well, that's the end of the news. So we'll see you guys next week. Look for more coverage. We should have another motherboard video or two out this week on Ryzen. And if you didn't see it, I put Linux in a modem. It's on the shelf right there behind me. It's a Hayes 1200 baud modem with a flux capacitor. That's on the Linux channel. Wendell, I'm signing out, and I'll see you later.
And I'm Ryan, and I'm also signing out, and we'll also see you later.